Coco Gauff didn't just wake up one morning and decide to speak out. What she finally shared was the result of years of emotional weight quietly piling up behind the scenes. Long before fans ever suspected tension, she was already carrying the kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from training or long rallies. It came from pretending everything was normal when it wasn't. What most people don't realize is that Sabalenka's intensity wasn't limited to a powerful serve or explosive forehand. It followed her everywhere into locker rooms, warm-up areas, and even the brief walk from the tunnel to the court. It wasn't one big outburst or one dramatic scene. It was a pattern of small, sharp moments that chipped away at Coco over time. There were the under-the-breath comments delivered just loud enough to land, the cold, lingering energy that hung in the air whenever they passed each other, the sarcastic tones Sabalenka saved for moments when no cameras were around. None of it was headline-worthy on its own, but together they created an atmosphere Coco couldn't shake. And through all of it, Coco was told the same thing over and over again. Don't talk about it, it'll only make things worse. So she swallowed it, smiled through it, forced herself to ignore feelings that were getting harder to ignore. That silence didn't protect her, it trapped her. She carried the pressure in ways nobody saw in her preparation, in her confidence in the way she walked onto the court already bracing for the attitude that might greet her. Fans only saw the competition. They never saw the emotional toll hiding behind it. But the moment everything shifted didn't happen during a match. There are heated moments in tennis, every player knows that. Adrenaline spikes, emotions flare, and words slip out that weren't meant to cut. But what happened between Coco and Sabalenka during that handshake wasn't one of those moments. It wasn't a blur of frustration or the residue of a tense rally. It was deliberate, clear, sharp enough to slice through whatever professionalism the moment demanded. As they approached the net, the crowd was still buzzing from the intensity of the match. Coco expected the usual, a handshake, a nod, maybe a tight smile. Instead, Sabalenka leaned in and muttered low enough to hide, but loud enough to wound act like a champion if you want to be treated like one. Those words didn't feel like criticism of a point or frustration from a misplay. They carried something heavier: judgment, condescension, a message aimed directly at who Coco was, not how she played. It didn't question her strategy, it questioned her worth. Coco walked off the court trying to shake it off, but it clung to her. It replayed in her head that night and the night after, looping in a tone that felt more personal each time she remembered it. It struck at her identity, the part of her she guarded most, the part she built through discipline, grace, and consistency. Sabalenka didn't just attack her game. She attacked the way Coco carried herself. And that was the moment something shifted. Coco realized this wasn't just the heat of competition. It wasn't a rival pushing her to be better. This was targeted, intentional, and far deeper than tennis. For the first time, the line between intensity and disrespect was unmistakably crossed. But what happened off-court hit even harder. If the handshake moment planted the first seed of doubt, the confrontation that followed weeks later made it impossible for Coco to ignore what was happening. It didn't take place on a court in front of cheering fans or under the eye of a broadcast camera. It happened in a narrow hallway deep inside a tournament facility, one of those hidden spaces where athletes breathe, regroup, and try to leave emotions behind. Except that day, Sabalenka brought every emotion with her. Coco had just finished a taxing match. Her mind was still swirling with strategy and adrenaline when Sabalenka approached her with an expression Coco couldn't read. Part anger, part frustration, part something else. Without warning, Sabalenka raised her voice and began accusing Coco of things that made no sense. She claimed Coco had done certain actions on purpose, insisted she'd shown disrespect, and blamed her for moments in the match that Coco had nothing to do with. The words weren't just emotional, they were loaded. They came fast, sharp, and coated with a resentment Coco hadn't seen before. Coco froze. She had no script for this moment. She wasn't trained on how to handle an older, more experienced, more intimidating player unloading on her. The power imbalance was real, and it hit her instantly. She stood there in stunned silence, trying to understand what she had supposedly done wrong. For a split second, she even questioned herself. Did I actually do something? Did I miss something? But deep down, she knew the accusations weren't grounded in reality. They were misdirected, frustration projected onto the easiest target in the room. Still, the damage was done. That exchange didn't end when Sabalenka walked away. It followed Coco into the locker room, into practice, into her sleep. The weight of it started seeping into her preparation and her confidence. And yet the real breaking point happened where no cameras exist. The hallway confrontation rattled Coco, but she convinced herself it was a one-off moment, just emotions running too high. She told herself to move on, to stay focused, to keep things professional. But everything changed the day she stepped into the locker room and heard something she was never meant to hear. It was after a long practice session one of those days where her body was tired, but her mind was determined to reset. As she walked in, she heard voices, Sabalenka's voice sharp and unfiltered, venting to someone on her team. Coco expected to hear frustration about a match or technical irritation about her game. But what she heard wasn't about tennis at all. It was about her, who she was as a person. Sabalenka questioned Coco's authenticity, mocked the way she carried herself, implied she was pretending to be someone she wasn't. These were comments attacking her character, not her forehand. And the sting didn't come from the words alone. It came from the source. Coco had always spoken respectfully about Sabalenka in interviews. She admired her power, her intensity, her drive. To hear that same person casually tearing her down behind her back felt like a punch she never saw coming. That moment created a shift inside her, because once you hear something like that, you can't unhear it. Suddenly, the sarcastic smiles made more sense. The stiff body language, the whispered comments just out of earshot, the stares that felt more like warnings than glances. Small things she'd brushed off now stacked together like clues pointing to one truth. This wasn't accidental tension, it was intentional. Her team started noticing the change too. Coco looked distracted, quieter, heavier. But every time they asked, she deflected, "I'm fine, just tired." But she wasn't fine. Then the media added fuel to a fire they didn't understand. By the time the tension reached the media, Coco was already carrying more emotional weight than anyone realized. But reporters weren't interested in the full context or the human side of what she was dealing with. They wanted a storyline, something dramatic, something clickable, something they could turn into a headline before the press room lights cooled. And they found it. Every tiny moment between Coco and Sabalenka, even ones that meant nothing, suddenly became evidence of a rivalry. A long blink turned into a death stare. A tired expression became Coco fuming over Sabalenka. A tense point was spun into a battle of egos. The narratives weren't built on truth, they were stitched together from half-glimpses, misinterpretations, and speculation disguised as insight. Coco walked into press conferences already drained, hoping for simple questions about her performance or strategy. Instead, she was blindsided by quotes Sabalenka supposedly said, comments she had never heard, interpretations twisted so far she could barely recognize them. Do you feel targeted? Did Sabalenka disrespect you today? How do you respond to what she said about you earlier this week? She forced a smile, nodded politely, and gave neutral answers because she'd been taught to stay composed. But inside, she felt ambushed, confused, cornered. The emotional fog made it harder and harder to focus, as if she was being pushed into a storyline she never agreed to play in. And the worst part, the public ate it up, not knowing they were unknowingly adding pressure to a situation already cracking behind the scenes. Fans speculated, comment sections exploded, narratives grew legs. Coco wasn't just fighting Sabalenka's energy anymore, she was fighting a version of events the world was convinced was true. But one last encounter made everything explode internally. The moment that finally broke, Coco didn't come during a match, a press conference, or even a heated exchange. It came in a quiet hallway, one of those long, echoing corridors players use to exit the court and decompress. After a draining match, Coco was walking through that hallway trying to settle her mind when she crossed paths with Sabalenka. Coco did what she always did. She smiled politely. A gesture of respect, of professionalism, of trying to keep things civil. But Sabalenka didn't return the smile. Instead, as she passed by, she lowered her voice just enough to make it seem unintentional, but not low enough to hide the sting. She whispered something sharp, personal, and unmistakably directed at Coco. It wasn't about the match. It wasn't about tennis. It was a jab straight at who Coco was, the kind that doesn't bruise the skin, but bruises something deeper. Loud enough to wound, quiet enough to deny. Coco stopped in her tracks. Not visibly, not dramatically, but inside something snapped. Not out of anger, but clarity. For the first time, she saw the full pattern for what it really was. Her silence hadn't been creating peace. It had been creating permission. Every time she stayed quiet, she gave Sabalenka room to push further. Every time she let it go, she taught people that she would carry the emotional weight so they didn't have to. And in that hallway, she decided she couldn't do it anymore. She realized silence wasn't protecting her. It was protecting the disrespect that kept hurting her. That whisper didn't just cross a line, it erased whatever line she'd been trying so hard to maintain. For For the first time, Coco stopped protecting the problem. When Coco finally decided to speak, it wasn't to spark a feud or ignite a headline war. She wasn't interested in drama. She wasn't trying to tear Sabalenka down or turn fans against her. What she wanted was something far more basic, something every athlete deserves: respect. Respect that doesn't disappear the moment the cameras turn off. Respect that doesn't depend on who won the last point. Respect that doesn't shift with someone else's mood. For Coco, emotional safety became as essential as physical safety. People understand injuries to the body, but rarely the ones to the mind. What she dealt with wasn't a pulled muscle or a bad ankle. It was the constant strain of knowing she'd have to walk into matches carrying tension she didn't create. It affected everything: her training sessions, her sleep patterns, her day-to-day motivation. She began waking up tired before a ball was even hit her mind, cluttered with what-ifs and unspoken worries. Over time, she realized her silence wasn't neutral. It wasn't keeping the peace, it was giving permission. By not saying anything, she taught Sabalenka, the media, and even herself that she would accept the emotional hits quietly. She absorbed them match after match, moment after moment, until she could feel them carving into her confidence. But something changed when she finally drew that line. She began to grow into a version of herself she hadn't fully seen before, a version that could still be kind and respectful, but firm enough to set boundaries. A version that didn't shrink to keep others comfortable. A version that understood speaking up isn't disrespect, it's self-protection. This wasn't about conflict, it was about clarity. It was about reclaiming her space in a sport she loves without carrying pain she never deserved. But this story is bigger than two players. When Coco finally spoke her truth, it wasn't just about Sabalenka, it was about a culture in tennis that has quietly pushed young players to stay silent for years. The WTA celebrates intensity, passion, and competitive fire, but it rarely talks about the emotional pressure simmering beneath those qualities. Young athletes, especially rising stars like Coco, are often taught the same lesson: don't speak up, don't rock the boat, don't create noise. They're told that silence equals professionalism, even when silence leaves them carrying weight that was never theirs to begin with. And in that environment, the line between passion and emotional aggression becomes dangerously blurry. Fans see fire and applaud it. Commentators see intensity and call it greatness. But the emotional aftermath, the backstage tension, the cutting remarks, the quiet hostility never makes it onto the highlight reel. Rivalries bruise more than just bodies. They bruise confidence, mental stability, and the sense of safety players need to perform at their best. Coco's honesty didn't just call out a pattern, it exposed a truth many players feel but rarely verbalize. Respect in tennis can't be conditional. It can't show up only when someone wins or disappear when emotions run high. It has to be consistent even in fierce competition. By drawing her line publicly, Coco didn't just protect her own peace, she opened a conversation the sport has avoided for too long. Her statement reshaped the narrative overnight. What once looked like a simple rivalry now revealed deeper layers about accountability, emotional maturity, and the responsibilities athletes owe one another. Coco's decision to speak created a ripple effect, reminding everyone that being a champion is about more than hitting winners. It's about how you treat the people you compete against. And that message lingers long after the last point is played, leaving fans and players alike questioning something bigger. What kind of culture do we want this sport to have, and who will shape it going forward?